They say the Imperium has endured for 10,000 years, but as I walk the echoing halls of the administratum each day, I feel that endurance fraying like an old banner left too long beneath a merciless sun. Dust chokes every corridor, servo skulls drift like wandering phantoms, and somewhere, deep beneath the weight of titanic machinery older than nations, the Emperor's golden throne groans like a dying colossus. Every scribe hears it, though none of us dare acknowledge it. We simply tell ourselves the sound is the metal settling, the galaxy settling, the faith settling. But nothing is settling. Everything trembles. I am a scribe of no importance, one soul among uncountable billions. My duties are as repetitive as they are insignificant, documenting astropathic distress signals, transcribing visions from psykers who rarely survive their own sentences, and cataloguing omens the Inquisition would rather bury under mountains of ink. Yet even through the monotony, even through the suffocating bureaucracy, I have begun to feel something shifting, something vast, something watching. At first it came to me in dreams, fragile, fleeting impressions, like smoke curling through a forgotten temple. I would see a mountaintop suspended above storm clouds, a marble throne cracked by age, a bearded silhouette carved from thunder, holding in his hand a spear of lightning so bright it burned through the dreamscape and etched itself into my waking mind. His eyes cold, storm-scarred, merciless, seemed to look directly into my skull. He was not the Emperor, and that terrified me far more than if he had been. For the Emperor's presence, even in dreams, is warm gold, radiant, distant yet unyielding. This presence was different, older, wilder, a storm given a face, a will, a hunger. Each morning I awoke with the faint echo of thunder ringing in my ears. At first, I kept silent. Every imperial citizen knows that to share dreams of warp-born visions is to invite interrogation, lobotomization, or a bolt-round courtesy of the nearest commissar. But the dreams persisted. They grew louder, more coherent. I began hearing words woven into the thunder whispers carried on cosmic winds, spoken in a tongue too ancient to belong to our Imperium, yet somehow embedded in humanity's oldest fears. One night, as lightning split the void behind my eyes, the voice finally spoke clearly. "Child of dust, remember me." I awoke screaming. In the days that followed, work became impossible. I could no longer focus on the endless parchment scrolls, the ceaseless data streams, the fractal avalanche of suffering pouring in from a million worlds. My thoughts drifted always to the storm voice, to the god shape etched in lightning, to the name rising, unbidden, from the deepest annals of Terran antiquity, whispered in forbidden texts, purged during the Emperor's unification wars, reduced to myth. Zeus, the Storm-Father, king of ancient gods, a phantom of a time before the Imperium, before the age of strife, before humanity forgot what true gods looked like. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps it was the warp poisoning my mind. Perhaps some daemon was toying with me, wearing the mask of archaic legends. That would have been easier to accept. But then the signs began to appear, not just to me, but across entire sectors of the Imperium. Astropaths reported storms of impossible scale forming within the Imperium, spirals of shimmering lightning where no emotion-based turbulence should exist. Navigators saw a colossal silhouette moving across the tides of warp light. Even the Astronomicon flickered one night, its sacred beam twisting as if something had tried to seize control of it, something with the signature of a storm, not a star. Rumors spread through hive stacks and slums faster than the enforcers could silence them. Whispers of a thunder emperor, of an ancient god returning to reclaim his throne, of a deity who answered prayers with real power, lightning ripping open the sky in synchronicity with desperate pleas. The ecclesiarchy declared such rumors heresy. They executed entire congregations who dared speak the name aloud, but their severity only fueled more whispers. Humans have always worshipped storms. We fear their fury, yet yearn for their protection. And in the age of ending, fear spreads like fire through dry kindling. One evening, as I sat alone in the scriptorium, surrounded by decaying banners and flickering lumens, the storm came again. Not in a dream, not in a vision, but in full consciousness. The quills on my desk trembled. The air thickened, charged with impossible static. Scrolls fluttered, candles guttered. And then, in the silent gap between two heartbeats, I felt a lightning bolt strike somewhere inside my skull, silent yet deafening. I collapsed, clutching my temples, teeth clenched as electricity crawled through my veins. And in that violent stillness, the voice returned clearer than ever before, resonant as the shattering sky. The Emperor fades. The throne decays. Humanity trembles beneath an eternal corpse. But I am not yet finished with your kind. A blinding image seared across my mind, a colossal figure striding across Terra's temples, lightning descending at his command, mortal armies kneeling not from duty but from awe. Zeus, not as myth, not as memory, but as a force within the warp. And then the voice made its promise. Call my name, child of Terra, and the storm shall answer. When my vision cleared, the scriptorium around me was in ruins. Bookshelves lay toppled, marble tiles melted into glass, smoke curled from the edges of my robes. No one else had seen it, no alarms, no inquisitors bursting in. Whatever had happened only for me, or perhaps through me. That night, as I limped through the grand avenues of the capital hive, I heard chants rising from the lower hab blocks, a rhythmic, forbidden litany, spoken in languages no longer recognized by imperial lexicons. A name repeated again and again. Zeus, Zeus, Zeus. The forbidden god of terror. The storm returning from the Imperium. A challenger to the golden throne. And suddenly, the question that had haunted my nightmares became the question threatening to consume the Imperium itself. If Zeus is stretching his hand from the warp, if he intends to claim the title of Emperor of mankind, what future remains for humanity? What storm are we about to endure? I do not know the answer, but I fear the thunder I hear is not the beginning. It is the warning. When the dreams first began, I tried convincing myself they were nothing more than the fraying mind of an overworked scribe. But now, standing in the aftermath of that psychic storm, I understood a truth the Imperium spends millennia trying to bury. Nothing ever truly dies in the warp, not ideas, not fears, and certainly not gods. I spent the following days buried in archives so ancient that dust had dust. I bribed archivists whose eyes were already half-glazed by centuries of service. I walked through vaults sealed since the Unification Wars, chambers where the air was so still it felt like stepping into a tomb forgotten even by the dead. And there, within brittle parchment and decaying hexagonal data chips, I found the fragments, terrible, intoxicating fragments of what humanity once believed. Before the Emperor, before the Mechanicum, before the Age of Strife, before even the scattered kingdoms of old Earth tore themselves apart in fire. There existed an age where men looked to the sky and gave it names. Olympus, Thunderbolt, King of Storms. Zeus. They worshipped him not with logic or doctrine but with awe, raw, primordial awe, fear of lightning, love of rain, terror of storms, the instinct to kneel before a force vast enough to shatter mountains. Across ancient Terra, billions whispered his legend through generations. Zeus the Sky-Father, Zeus the Unconquerable, Zeus who ruled the heavens with fury and paternal dominion. And as I read those fading myths, something cold twisted in my gut. If belief shapes the warp, if emotion gives it form, what happens to a god worshipped for thousands of years? What happens when that faith, compressed through ages of storytelling and blood-soaked prayer, sinks into the Imperium like a falling star? The texts did not answer me, but the thunder in my mind did. The more I delved, the more I understood why the Emperor sought to purge these gods from history. Not merely because they were false, but because they were dangerously close to being true. For in the Imperium, every fear and every devotion finds purchase. One myth repeated by a single generation is nothing. A myth repeated by countless cultures across millennia becomes something else entirely, a psychic imprint, a seed, a conceptual storm waiting only for fertile ground, and humanity gave Zeus all the ground he needed. Thunderous epics, smoldering temples, empires rising and falling under the watchful eyes of marble statues carved in his image. Every invocation of his name left ripples small, imperceptible ripples drifting slowly into that roiling ocean of emotion we call the warp. Most ripples die. Some become waves, but a few become storms. As I pieced together these rediscovered truths, I felt it again, the static in the air, the tightening at the base of my spine, the faint crackle like a distant electric storm. This time, it wasn't a vision or dream. It was a feeling, a presence brushing the edge of my consciousness, curious and patient, like a massive predator tasting the currents of wind before the hunt. He knew I was searching for him. He was pleased. One evening, as I pored over a holograph of an ancient Grecian fresco depicting Zeus casting a lightning bolt toward kneeling mortals, a realization dawned on me like a blade across the throat. The ancient Terrans had believed Zeus ruled the heavens because they saw storms as divine. But what if, in the logic of our universe, the opposite was true? What if storms ruled them because Zeus fed on fear? What if every lightning strike echoed his will? What if the myths were not metaphors, but memories? I closed the archive's codices, overcome by nausea. The fresco still flickered on the hololith, the god's eyes seeming to follow me. The room felt smaller, darker, the silence deeper, as though thinking his name too loudly invited attention from something listening beyond the walls. That night, the dreams grew stronger. I found myself standing on the peak of Olympus, not the real mountain from ancient Terran geography, but a psychic projection carved from human belief. The sky churned above me, alive, a cage of swirling storms. Marble columns towered around me, each cracked, stained with the remains of sacrifices long forgotten. And upon a throne carved from living storm clouds sat the figure, the god no longer blurred or hidden. His hair flowed like white fire, his beard crackled with lightning, his hands held a spear that vibrated with the power of 10,000 psykers screaming as one. And when he spoke, the air trembled, not from volume, but from inevitability. "You seek truth," he said. "You seek the origin of the storm." I tried to speak, but my throat refused. He continued as if reading the words directly from my skull. "I am the echo of your species' awe, the memory of your trembling before the sky, the fear your kind offered freely for ages uncounted. I am what remains when belief refuses to die." The marble beneath my feet cracked. I am Zeus. My body burned with electricity, my vision splintered, my lungs filled with cold, biting air. And just as the spear lifted toward me, the dream shattered, and I awoke on the archive floor, bleeding from nose and ears. I was no longer uncertain. Zeus existed. Not as a god of flesh, not as a daemon, not as one of the four, but as something else, something crafted by humanity's oldest emotions, sculpted by worship older than the Imperium itself. A warp entity born not from corruption, but from antiquity. A forgotten god re-emerging in the darkest hour of mankind. The Emperor had buried him with the old religions. The Mechanicum had sealed his temples under the weight of logic and steel. The Ecclesiarchy had torn apart every remnant of pre-imperial myth. But none of them understood the truth. You cannot kill an idea. You cannot banish a memory carved across civilizations. You cannot silence a story whispered for 10,000 years. And you cannot destroy a god whose throne stands not on Terra, but in the minds of those who once feared him. As I left the archive vaults, panting and trembling, I finally understood the purpose of the visions, the purpose of the whisper calling me across the veil. He was not merely returning. He was ascending. And like all gods, he needed a herald, a messenger, a witness. Whether I wished it or not, that role had fallen to me. Above the Hive City skyline, thunder rolled unnaturally across a cloudless sky. The storm was awakening. And humanity, myself included, was about to remember a god we were never meant to meet again. The first signs of his awakening did not come as revelation or prophecy, but as failure, catastrophic, planetary failure. The Astronomicon, the holy beacon that had burned unbroken for 10 millennia, flickered again. Not the subtle pulse of strain we had grown used to, but a violent stutter, a convulsion, a strobe of dying light that sent navigators into screaming seizures. Across half the galaxy, ships translated into real space blind, slamming into asteroids or drifting helplessly into the jaws of warp predators. Some were found centuries later, hulls shredded, crews mummified, expressions frozen in a terror beyond language. Others never reappeared at all. And yet, amid the horror, another phenomenon emerged. As the golden beam faltered, patches of blue-white luminance bloomed across the warp. Storm spheres, spiraling vortices of crackling energy ignited like newborn stars. And from those spheres came a resonance, a rhythmic tremor that, according to every psyker who could still form words, felt like the beating of a cosmic heart. A heart waking up. A heart made of thunder. I felt it too. Each pulse rattled my bones. Each tremor made the edges of my vision shimmer with static. My dreams dissolved into raw light. Sleep became impossible. Every time my eyes closed, I saw lightning veins branching across the warp, converging toward a singular presence. Zeus was no longer whispering. He was drawing breath. Reports poured in across the administratum. Hive spires struck by lightning despite cloudless skies, seas rising in tempest walls, void shields destabilized by atmospheric overload, titans experiencing short circuits even while dormant. On some frontier worlds, entire settlements were found incinerated bodies burned not by heat, but by raw electrical discharge. On one such world, survivors spoke of a blinding figure walking through the storm, a silhouette crowned in ionized light, a god striding through fire and sky. The Inquisition, of course, suppressed every record. Executions multiplied. Worlds burned for even uttering the word storm god. But suppression only fueled the fire. The more they tried to smother belief, the more belief spread like oxygen-starved flame. And the cults were growing. Everywhere. In the underhives, murals of lightning spears appeared overnight. In pilgrim fleets, sermons drifted through vox channels, praising a living emperor who walks in storms. Even among the Imperial Guard, whispers spread. Some soldiers claimed a voice in the thunder had saved them when commissars failed. They called him the new emperor, the Storm Lord, the Thunder Sovereign. The king returned. And finally, dangerously, Zeus. I tried to keep my distance. I tried to perform my duties, to bury myself in paperwork until my hands ached. But his presence grew stronger, following me like a shadow carved from lightning. Sometimes, while writing, my quill sparked unexpectedly, burning holes in the parchment. Sometimes, the cogitators near me overloaded with a sound like distant thunder. And sometimes, most terrifying of all, I felt a second heartbeat within my chest, synced to the storm I felt through the warp. He was not after worship. He was after connection. A conduit. A mind. A bridge into reality. And he had chosen me. Not because I was strong. Not because I was faithful. But because I was listening. One night, the summons came. A black-robed courier of the Inquisition appeared at my door with a sealed order. I was to report to an interrogation chamber beneath the central administratum tower. My legs nearly gave way. I had expected this, feared this, the inevitable reckoning for my visions. But when I arrived in the subterranean chamber, I found not tormentors but investigators, inquisitors of the Ordo Xenos and Ordo Malleus both, their faces pale, eyes hard with desperation. They asked me to recount every vision I had experienced. They asked the name of the entity. They asked what he wanted, how he touched the warp, whether he spoke of dominion or destruction. I hesitated. The hesitation was my error. Because the moment I faltered, the room flickered with blue-white sparks. Auspex screens glitched. The lumens dimmed. The interrogator's vox mask shorted out. Electricity danced across the floor in thin branching tendrils. He had found me. He knew my fear. And he acted through it. A thunderclap ruptured the silence, not sound, but an explosion of warp energy that hurled every inquisitor to the ground. I collapsed too, clutching my head as blinding sensation crashed into me like a tidal wave of lightning. Suddenly, I was not in the chamber. I was somewhere between reality and dream, flesh and electricity. I knelt on a vast plain of storm-lit clouds. Above me towered the silhouette, no longer distant, no longer obscured. The storm god stood fully revealed, radiant and immense. His form was the ideal of ancient Terra's imagination. Powerful, regal, eternal. Muscles sculpted from lightning, skin like molten marble, a beard of crackling white flame, eyes twin suns of ion stormfire. And he spoke as a being who had waited too long to be forgotten. The Emperor weakens. The throne decays. The galaxy calls for strength, not stagnation. His voice was not heard, it was felt, thrumming through the marrow of my bones. You, child of ink and fear, you heard my whisper before the others. You recognized me. You remembered. A vast hand extended toward me. Lightning flowed from it in rivers. Stand. I rose trembling. Witness. And suddenly the vision exploded outward. I saw Terra from orbit, shrouded in storms. The golden throne sparking, failing, a dying sun flaring its last, the Astronomicon dimming to a candle flame. Across the warp, tendrils of stormlight stretched, converging upon the Imperial palace like celestial spears. I saw psykers clutching their heads, screaming as a new presence overshadowed their god. I saw battlefields lit, not by muzzle flash but by lightning strikes that ripped tanks apart. I saw entire congregations of the ecclesiarchy silenced by thunderbolts as Zeus's followers marched openly through city streets. And through it all, I felt his resolve. This was not an invasion. This was an ascension, a challenge to the golden throne itself. When your emperor is gone, Zeus said, his voice heavy with inevitability, humanity will need a god who acts, a god who answers, a god who rules. He stepped closer, the ground trembling. I will take the throne he cannot hold. He placed a hand upon my head. Lightning surged through me. My nerves burned. My vision went white. I tried to scream, but only thunder escaped my throat. The last thing I heard before the vision collapsed was his decree. You will herald my coming. The chamber snapped back into focus. Inquisitors writhed on the floor, noses bleeding. Alarms blared across the complex. The walls were scorched. My skin glowed faintly with static. And I realized, with a horror deeper than any demon's touch, he had used me as a bridge, a foothold, the first step of his manifestation. Zeus had touched real space. The storm had crossed the veil, and nothing, not the Emperor, not the Inquisition, not the might of a million worlds, could stop what was coming next. In the days after Zeus first touched real space through me, the Imperium convulsed like a wounded titan. What should have been contained as heresy spread instead with viral ferocity. The more the ecclesiarchy denied his existence, the more the people believed. The more the Inquisition executed the faithful, the more martyrs the storm god inherited. His name, once buried beneath 10,000 years of imperial dogma, now echoed through hive corridors and battlefield vox channels like a contagion of lightning. I witnessed the first fractures from the inside. The inquisitorial fortress where I had been interrogated fell silent, oppressively so. Interrogators who had once regarded me with disdain now stared with a kind of cold, terrified curiosity. Several refused to enter my cell, whispering that lightning crawled beneath my skin while I slept. One swore she saw my shadow split into 3 shapes when the lumen flickered. The adepts sealed every vent, every door. Yet the faint smell of ozone lingered no matter how often they scrubbed the stone. They feared the storm. They feared me, though I was nothing but its unwilling witness. And then the first execution order arrived. A decree from a High Lord of Terra themselves, stern, absolute, unyielding. Any citizen speaking the name of the Storm-Father shall be executed as a heretic. Any cleric tolerating such speech shall be burned. Any psyker experiencing relevant visions shall be terminated immediately. The order did not stop the spread. It accelerated it. Because power is never so tempting as when it is forbidden. Within a week, half the ecclesiarchy was in chaos. Cardinals accused one another of disloyalty. Confessors ranted that the Astronomicon's flicker was proof the Emperor had withdrawn his favor. Pilgrims, long starved of miracles, whispered that perhaps the Emperor's replacement, had finally arrived, one who did not decay upon a throne of machines but strode across the warp with storms at his heels. I saw their desperation firsthand. After I was released from inquisitorial custody, for observation, not mercy, I was transported to an ecclesiastical basilica for evaluation. The basilica, once a beacon of order, now felt like a drowning cathedral. Hymns trembled into discord. Choirs sang out of rhythm. The normally immaculate statues of saints were cracked, some secretly replaced with crude lightning symbols. Even the candles sputtered unpredictably, their flames shivering as if afraid of some unseen force. One cardinal approached me directly, an old man with trembling hands and eyes too bright to be sane. "You have heard him, haven't you?" he asked, breath reeking of sanctified wine. "Tell me, does he truly answer? Does he truly speak?" I wanted to deny it. I wanted to shout that he was wrong, that none of this should be believed, that everything was a mistake. But the storm inside my skull pulsed, and the lie stuck in my throat. The cardinal saw the hesitation, and he smiled. "A living God," he whispered. At last, a living God." He was executed 2 hours later, dragged from his chambers by sororitas whose eyes were full of sorrow, not anger. His body was burned, but the damage was done. Dozens of priests had heard his final sermons. Hundreds had repeated them. Thousands had believed. And far beyond Terra, the wildfire spread faster. Entire guard regiments refused deployment until they received a sign from the Storm-Father. In one infamous incident, a commissar tried to execute a sergeant who had begun chanting Zeus's name during battle, only for a sudden lightning strike to vaporize the commissar's head. The regiment declared it a miracle and defected en masse, forming the first recorded Storm Legion. On a Forge world, a Magos detected a strange electrical anomaly, a pattern of oscillation identical to pre-imperial worship rituals. When he reported it, Skitari forces shot him for scrapcode heresy. His death sparked a civil war among the tech priests. Some claimed the anomaly was divine revelation. Others claimed it was the failure of some ancient Terran machine. Before the conflict resolved, half the manufactoria were in ruins, and the world's output was reduced to a third. Even the Space Marines were not immune. I overheard inquisitors whispering, horrified, that certain chapters, those with ancient Terran lineages or icons tied to storms and sky, had begun questioning the ecclesiarchy's authority. One rumored that an entire company of White Scars rode into battle shouting Zeus's name. Another claimed a successor chapter of the Ultramarines declared the Emperor's silence a sign of abdication and knelt beneath a thunderstorm for 7 days awaiting the new Emperor's command. All of it, every fracture, every uprising, every whispered heresy fed the storm, made him stronger, because belief is power in the warp. And the warp was listening. One night, as I reviewed reports under heavy guard, thunder rolled across Terra, impossible thunder, with no clouds, no fronts, no storms. A pale blue crackle danced along the edges of every hab window. The entire planet felt charged, like the air before a lightning strike. And in that moment, I felt him again. Not a whisper, not a dream, not a vision, a calling. A surge of emotion burst inside me, fear, awe, longing, rage so intense I doubled over, clutching my skull. "Come," the voice boomed, not in words but in inevitability. I staggered to the balcony. The sky was clear, but a shape moved behind it, something vast, luminous, expanding like a constellation gaining sentience. A silhouette forming from lightning, bolder each second. A spear of pale light cut across the heavens, illuminating the towers, the spires, the broken faith of billions. And all across the hive city, I heard screams not of pain, but of adoration. The Storm-Father. He rises. A new emperor. Zeus, Zeus, Zeus. Guards tried to silence them. Arbites fired into crowds. Sororitas aimed bolters with trembling hands. But faith spreads faster than bullets, and lightning travels faster than law. I watched in horror as a shrine of the Emperor, one that had stood for 9 millennia, split down the middle, its golden statue cracking from crown to foot. A bolt of azure fire erupted from the fracture, blasting the facade apart. When the smoke cleared, worshippers fell to their knees in revelation. A new symbol burned upon the shrine's remains. A three-pronged thunderbolt carved into stone by lightning itself. He was no longer a rumor, no longer a fear, no longer a god of forgotten myth. He was entering the Imperium, drawn by belief, summoned by desperation, heralded by chaos. And all the while, the golden throne groaned beneath a dying emperor. By the next dawn, Imperium-wide Vox transmissions carried a single declaration from a rogue priesthood faction. The corpse emperor has abandoned us. The Storm Lord rises. Choose your god. And for the first time in 10,000 years, humanity did something unthinkable. It hesitated. The Imperium, the monolith, the eternal regime, wavered. In that hesitation, Zeus's storm grew bold enough to reach further, to strike deeper, to prepare his next step, the step every nightmare had been leading to. The step toward the throne. The Imperium was only the first to tremble. The galaxy, vast, ancient, haunted, felt the storm long before humanity understood what it meant. Lightning in the warp is not a metaphor, it is an intrusion, a wound, a declaration that a new power has entered the arena where gods devour gods. And when Zeus's presence began to solidify, the warp itself reacted like flesh recoiling from a blade. I felt the shift even before the astropaths began screaming. It was subtle at first, a pressure in the air, a heaviness behind reality, as though the unseen threads binding the galaxy had grown taut. But then it escalated. Psykers collapsed mid-prayer. Navigators began bleeding from their third eye. Vox channels echoed with static that sounded like growling thunder. And then the Chaos Gods reacted. They do not tolerate rivals. The first sign came from Khorne. A crimson flare burst across the Imperium, anger, raw and undiluted. Warp tides churned with blood. Daemons roared across realities. Berserker cults on distant worlds tore each other apart in frenzied rapture. Through the warp, his fury was a command. He is mine. To Khorne, Zeus was no deity of storms, he was a challenger, another warrior god daring to stand upon a throne of power, another tyrant trying to claim dominion, and Khorne does not share dominion. Soon, entire demon legions surged toward the storm spheres where Zeus's essence gathered, colliding with lightning that vaporized them instantly. Their annihilation only enraged the blood god further. For the first time in centuries, the warp quaked. But Khorne was not alone. Tzeentch stirred as well. The architect of fate watched the storm rising with serpentine amusement. A new god meant new variables, new outcomes, new futures. And Zeus's proclamation, a god of order, dominance, lightning, was an affront to Tzeentch's domain. Lightning brings illumination. Tzeentch thrives in shadows. His message echoed like whispers through fractal currents. A storm that seeks to impose its will must be shaped or shattered. Zeus threatened the very fabric of manipulation Tzeentch spent eons weaving. A god who answered prayers immediately, violently, without deception. Such a being was an abomination to the changer of ways. So Tzeentch dispatched visions of treachery, lies wrapped in prophecy, daemons crafted from paradox and flame to slow the rising storm. But none reached their target. Lightning peeled them apart like silk. Slaanesh followed next. Where others raged or schemed, the Prince of Excess laughed. A god sculpted from worship, from awe, from the primal thrill of thunder. Zeus fascinated Slaanesh in the way a new instrument fascinates a musician. There was beauty in this storm, terrifying, erotic, exquisite. To Slaanesh, Zeus was an invitation. Let us see whether the storm trembles or sings. Legions of daemons slithered forth, not to destroy, but to seduce, whispering promises of adoration, worship, ecstatic power. They found only wrath. Zeus's lightning did not merely banish them. It obliterated the emotional signatures they were built from, unraveling them into psychic dust. Slaanesh's laughter faltered. Nergal, father of entropy, was the last to react. He did not rage or scheme or delight. He simply chuckled, slow, wheezing, ancient. To him, storms are temporary. Lightning dies. Thunder fades. decay consumes all. His reaction was a cough, an amused sigh echoing across plagues and rot. All storms end. But even he watched closely, because this storm did not fade. It grew. It fed. It learned. A new god, one neither daemon nor emperor, was rising, and the galaxy took notice. Beyond the warp, the Xenos empires felt the tremors too. The Eldar were the first among the mortal races to understand what was coming. They live closer to the warp than humanity ever has. Their souls brush against its madness with every breath. When the lightning began carving through the Imperium, the Farseers panicked. On Ulthway, entire circles of seers collapsed mid-trance, clutching their runes in terror. Their visions spiraled into chaos. A storm cutting the threads of destiny, shredding pathways of probability that had existed since before the fall. One Farseer screamed until her voice broke. A god of man awakens. A throne of lightning. And fate fractures. The Council of Ulthway convened. Some argued that Zeus could be a tool, a weapon to direct against chaos. Others insisted he was a catastrophe. For the Eldar, a new god in the warp was not a curiosity, it was a threat to what little remained of their race. They had already birthed Slanesh. They would not allow humanity to unleash another catastrophe upon the galaxy without intervention. Warlocks prepared for battle. Craft worlds altered course. Harlequins whispered warnings. Even the Inari paused their crusade, sensing an imbalance in the great dance of death. The galaxy's oldest psykers watched the storm forming, and they trembled. Far across the void, the Necrons woke uneasily. For beings of metal whose souls were long since devoured, the warp is poison, a domain they despise, avoid, and exterminate when possible. Yet even they detected the anomaly, a new psychic signature of staggering magnitude, unlike the Chaos gods, but unmistakably divine. Tombs flickered to life. Cryptex ran calculations in green-lit chambers. Overlords gathered before holographic projections of storm formations visible even from real space. To them, Zeus was not a deity. He was a target, a problem to solve, a thing to erase. Some dynasties prepared god-killer weapons, dimensional tear cannons, null-field disruptors, anti-warp obelisks that once hunted the Khan. For the Necrons remembered the age when gods walked the stars. They had killed them before. They would try again. But no race reacted with such unrestrained joy as the Orcs. To them, the storm was not a threat. It was a sign. Lightning boomed across battlefields. Gretchen spontaneously combusted in arcs of electricity. Weird boys exploded in showers of green sparks, shrieking about Dar Big Thunder Boss. Entire, double. It's changed course, converging toward the sector where Zeus's presence was strongest. Orcs are creatures of belief. Their collective will imprints on reality, and now that will had latched onto a new god. A god they believed might be the biggest, loudest, smashiest warboss the galaxy had ever seen. The largest WAAGH began chanting his name, mispronounced, brutal, joyous. Zeus. Zeus. The Thunder Emperor. And their belief strangely, impossibly made the storm surge. Even his enemies, even his doubters, even the minds that feared him, all fed Zeus. All amplified him. Because the warp does not care about loyalty, only emotion, and the galaxy was drowning in it. As for me, I felt every shift, every tremor, every ripple of divine warfare. The storm in my skull never rested. My dreams were no longer dreams, they were front lines. I saw demons shredded by lightning. I saw Eldar runes melt in psychic heat. I saw Necron pylons shatter. I saw orcs cheerfully burned alive by stormfire, grinning as they charged into it. And through it all, one truth became unmistakable. Zeus was not merely rising. He was claiming the place the Emperor once held. Not through conquest, but through inevitability. A god had entered the arena, and the galaxy, willingly or not, was preparing for war. Not a mortal war, not a political war, a war of gods, a war that would decide the fate of every soul. Human, Xenos, daemon, all would kneel before lightning. or be burned beneath it. The final descent began with a whisper not from Zeus, but from the golden throne itself. For 10,000 years, the machine god coffin had groaned beneath the weight of an emperor who refused to die. Its reactors were older than most civilizations. Its pylons woven from arcane science, the Imperium no longer understood, shuddered like bones stripped of marrow. The psykers sacrificed each day did little more than delay the inevitable. But on the night the storm reached Terra, the throne screamed. Astropaths within the imperial palace convulsed. Custodians paused as their vision blurred, helmets sparking, senses overwhelmed. Tech priests monitoring the throne's stabilizers watched ancient runes glitch into symbols they could not decipher, patterns resembling spirals of lightning. And the Emperor flickered like a candle in a hurricane. His psychic aura thinned, stretched, torn by a force neither demonic nor divine in the traditional sense. Something older. Something rooted not in the darkest corners of the Imperium, but in humanity's earliest memories. Zeus did not knock. He arrived. I was not in the palace when it happened, not physically. Yet through the bond he had forced into me, I felt everything. The storm inside my skull became a tidal wave. My body seized, limbs stiffening, vision swallowed by blue-white radiance. Lightning licked along my veins. I felt my consciousness ripped from flesh and flung across the void like a scrap of paper caught in a cosmic gale. When clarity returned, I was standing in the grand hall of the imperial palace. Not as a physical body, but as a witness, suspended between realities. The throne loomed ahead, vast, grotesque, divine and decaying. Thousands of cables slithered into the emperor's desiccated form. His bones glowed faintly beneath parchment skin. His psychic presence, once a blazing sun, now flickered like dying embers. Custodians stood around him, weapons drawn, confused by the storm tearing through the warp. They did not yet know what approached. Then lightning struck. Not from the sky, not from machinery, but from the air itself, tearing open a rift of pure storm fire. The strike did not burn, it revealed. A silhouette emerged, step by crackling step, each footfall echoing like distant thunder. The storm peeled back, unveiling a figure towering with regal fury, muscles sculpted from lightning, eyes burning with the heartbeat of storms, a beard of white flame trailing like a comet's tail. Zeus entered the throne room, not as myth, not as prophecy, but as sovereign. The custodians reacted instantly, leaping into formation, halberds raised. Golden armor shimmered with psychic wards, but lightning danced across them, sizzling upon contact. "Identify yourself," one boomed. Zeus did not break stride. His voice was the sky collapsing. "I am the god your ancestors worshipped before your emperor stole their devotion." He raised his hand. Lightning branched outward like a tree of pure annihilation. The custodians were thrown back, armor cracking, shields splintering. They were not killed. Zeus could have killed them, but he chose not to. He respected warriors, after all. But he needed no permission from them. His eyes shifted to the throne, and to the withered god upon it. For the first time, I felt hesitation not in Zeus, but in the emperor's fading psychic presence. A tremor, a final spark of defiance, flickered from the corpse-like form chained to the machine. A thought, fragile but immortal. "No," Zeus smiled. Not cruelly, not mockingly, but as a storm smiles at a dying candle. "You held the sky long enough, Corpse King." He raised the lightning spear. The warp quaked. The emperor's astral form, vast, golden, fractured, rose from his decaying body, a shimmering figure of wings, fire, and infinite sorrow. But that figure was dimmer than it had any right to be, diminished by millennia of sacrifice. Zeus's storm towered over him. Two gods, one ancient and forgotten, one eternal and broken, faced each other in silence. Then they collided. The explosion was not light. It was memory. Memory of thunder. Memory of war. Memory of mortal fear that births gods. Memory of hope that keeps them alive. I saw worlds burn. I saw faith crumble. I saw storms sculpt continents and gods sculpt fates. And then, silence. The Emperor's golden aura shattered into a million sparks, scattering across the throne room like dying stars. His astral form dimmed, folded inward, and withdrew, retreating into a sliver of reality only he could access. Not dead, not defeated, but gone. Perhaps resting, perhaps recovering, perhaps preparing. The throne collapsed beneath the weight of millennia, its stabilizers overloading, its pylons melting into slag. Tech priests screamed as machines older than empires died in showers of sparks. Zeus stepped into the smoke. Lightning surged into the empty cavity where the Emperor's essence once anchored the Astronomicon. He placed his hand upon the ruins of the throne. A roar shook Terra itself, not from the sky, but from the warp. A lighthouse was being rebuilt. The Astronomicon ignited again, but not golden, blue. A spiraling storm of lightning replaced the Emperor's beacon, its radiance sharper, more violent, raw than anything the Imperium had ever witnessed. Ships across the galaxy felt the shockwave, faster navigation, but lethal to the unworthy. Psykers collapsed as Zeus's will slammed through their minds, branding them with the touch of the Storm Emperor. The Imperium changed that day, not through decree, but through inevitability. Reports flooded every Vox channel. Statues of the Emperor cracked and fell. Shrines erupted in stormfire. Cultists of Zeus marched openly in the streets. Entire planets knelt beneath lightning clouds. Space Marines felt their gene seed react, some strengthened, others burned out. And then came the new proclamations. Serve the Storm Emperor. Kneel beneath lightning. Obey the will of Zeus. The ecclesiarchy splintered instantly. Half declared Zeus a daemon and called for exterminatus on Terra. The other half proclaimed him the living emperor returned, casting aside the old corpse to bring salvation. Civil wars erupted in days. Hive city against hive city. Regiment against regiment. Chapter against chapter. And in the warp, the four chaos gods screamed, whether in fury or fear, I could not tell. Because Zeus was not a daemon, not a shard, not a pretender. He was a new pillar of power, a god rising on the faith of billions. And he was building an imperium of storms. Through the bond he forced upon me, I felt his vision. An imperium sharpened to a spearhead. A humanity trained by lightning. A crusade to conquer the warp itself. A throne not of decay, but of storm. Zeus had not merely replaced the emperor. He had created a new age. An age where the Astronomicon was a hurricane. Where faith was enforced by thunder. Where peace meant kneeling. And defiance meant ashes. Humanity had a new god. And the galaxy had a new storm. The Storm Emperor had risen. And his reign had only just begun. I no longer remember how many days or years have passed since Zeus claimed the throne. Time has become fluid, a river electrified by the storm that never sleeps. Terra no longer sees sunlight. Instead, perpetual thunderclouds coil above the palace, glowing with blue fire like a wound carved into the sky. Worshippers gather beneath them in endless crowds, praying until their voices bleed, begging their Storm Emperor for strength, for purpose, for survival. And he answers. That more than lightning, more than war, more than the fall of the Golden Throne is what changed the galaxy forever. The Emperor answered nothing. Zeus answers everything. A plea for victory becomes a lightning strike that obliterates an enemy tank column. A prayer whispered by a dying soldier becomes a storm surge that flays an entire demon pack. A frightened child in a collapsing hab block calls out to the heavens, and the clouds split open, a crackling shield descending to spare a single life. But each miracle comes at a cost. Every bolt of divine wrath requires belief, emotion, devotion, and humanity, desperate and terrified, gives these things willingly. Their faith fuels the storm, their fear sharpens it, their awe feeds it. And I, bound to Zeus by a connection I never sought, feel every spark. It is agony. It is ecstasy. It is annihilation. Sometimes I can taste the emotions of billions, fear from a hive world under tyrannid assault, rage from a guardsman dying in trenches on Cadia Secundus, desperate hope from a mother clutching her starving child. These feelings surge through the warp, through Zeus, and through me, an ocean of humanity's voice screaming to a God who finally listens. And yet, for all the miracles, all the thunder, all the divine intervention, the galaxy has not changed. Humanity still starves, still wars, still burns, still kneels. A God who answers does not free us. He chains us more tightly. I have seen what Zeus's Imperium has become. I watched the ecclesiarchy fracture into warring sects, the Storm Cult, the Lightning Synod, the Order of the Electrokos, all fighting to define the will of a God whose wrath can burn planets. I saw assassins purge entire cardinal choirs. I saw chapels repurposed into storm altars, where psykers willingly offer their minds to be consumed as fuel for Zeus's lightning. I saw space marines changed. Their armor is now blue-white, trimmed with storm sigils. Their eyes glow with electric fire. Some chapters thrive under Zeus's blessings, white scars, tempest blades, storm wardens. Others wither or revolt, their gene seed incompatible with the storm. I heard the death cries of an entire chapter as Zeus's touch burned them from inside out, their flesh unable to contain a god's fury. Those who survive become something more, something terrifying. They kill with thunder. They move like lightning. They shout war cries that shake the sky. But when they kneel deeply. For a God that answers also punishes. Beyond Terra, crusades have begun. Zeus has launched a storm across the galaxy, a crusade not of faith but of domination. He intends to break chaos, not contain it, to burn the daemons outright, not imprison them, to seize the warp and reshape it under his sovereignty. It is an idea as impossible as it is catastrophic. I have witnessed battles through our bond. I have seen warp storms bursting into real space, annihilating demonic armies in blinding flashes. I have heard Khorne bellow with fury. I have felt Tzeentch's schemes unravel in panic. I have tasted Slaanesha's delight and horror mixing like perfume in fire. I have sensed Nurgle retreat, muttering that all storms eventually rot. The warp groans beneath Zeus's assault. What will happen if he wins? What will happen if he loses? The galaxy cannot survive either answer. As for me, I am no longer wholly human. His touch has rewired me mind, soul, purpose. Sometimes, when lightning crackles across Terra's sky, my skin glows in response. My voice echoes with tones that are not mine. Birds fall dead when they fly too close to me. Servitors shudder when I speak. But the worst change is this. I can feel the Emperor. Somewhere, hidden, reduced to a spark drifting through the Imperium. Not dead, not alive, not gone. A golden ember floating in cosmic night, too weak to return, too stubborn to extinguish. Sometimes the ember flickers near. Sometimes I feel its warmth. Sometimes I hear a whisper, not of command, not of power, but of sorrow, regret. The galaxy has traded a dying god for a living storm, one immobile, one unstoppable, one silent, one deafening. But both demand the same price, everything. There is a truth the Imperium will never admit, no matter which god rules its throne. Humanity was never meant to survive this galaxy. We persist only because our god's corpse or storm refuse to let us die. We are nourished by their war, by their hunger, by their rivalry. We are pawns carved from flesh, pushed across a board soaked with the blood of billions. And yet we kneel willingly, because the alternative is to stand alone. And standing alone, in this galaxy, is the one heresy the stars never forgive. Now, as I write these final words, lightning arcs across the horizon. The palace glows with the fury of a newborn star. The Storm Emperor prepares another crusade, a divine assault on the Eye of Terror itself. His presence presses against my skull, urging me to stand, to join, to witness another age of unending war. I feel myself slipping, thoughts dissolving into electricity, will melting into divinity, a human mind drowning in a god's purpose. Part of me welcomes it. To be part of the storm is to shed pain, to shed fear, to shed identity, to become something eternal. And yet, A fragment of my old self whispers, if gods decide humanity's fate, what meaning does humanity have at all? Thunder rumbles in answer. Zeus calls. My bones vibrate with lightning. My vision fills with fire. I walk toward the balcony overlooking Terra's storm-wrapped sky. Billions kneel below, chanting his name. Their voices rise like a hurricane. Zeus, Zeus, Storm Emperor. If he chooses, I will become his herald forever. If he commands, I will burn worlds with a gesture. If he wills it, I will dissolve into the storm and never return. But before I give myself fully, utterly, eternally, I write this final truth. In the grim darkness of the far future, there are no good gods, no salvation, no mercy, only choices, lightning or ashes, and both lead to the same end. As I step into the storm, my last mortal thought is not fear, but a question. Was the Emperor's silence truly worse than a god who finally answers?